Hello everyone, and this is the first webinar in our series of webinars, our summer school, the Freemen Summer School. My name is Jonathan Adalist. I'm with the Freemen Group, and I'll be giving a webinar today on biodefense and infectious disease funding opportunities. And just a few things to start off with. First of all, this is recorded, and it will be on our YouTube channel. Any questions you have, please enter into the chat, and I will try to answer as many of them as possible towards the end. And that's it. Let's get started. So, a little bit about who's speaking with you today. So the Freemen Group is a consulting firm. We've been doing this for 15 years now, 40 full-time employees. We work with clients across the life sciences, both academia and industry, academia all over places like Tufts, Mount Sinai, Duke, and in industry all the way from the smallest startups, one-person virtual companies, and all the way up to big pharma companies like J&J, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, etc. We submit about 250 applications every year. And so we've really amassed quite a bit of experience and expertise over the time, especially in large-scale applications, which we enjoy a fairly high success rate at obtaining as well. And I'll be sharing quite a few of those today, as you'll be seeing in a few moments. We view ourselves basically as a tool to maximize your funding potential. We do that by first and foremost identifying the most relevant opportunities. You really do have to be applying to something that you're really responsive for. Otherwise, no matter how good your science is, you will not be awarded. We strategize to maximize the application's chances. And we do that also through a process I'll go into a bit more later. We manage any complex project production processes, multi-PI, multifaceted projects, organize it, put it all together. We lead the application writing itself, although we do need our clients on board for that. We can't write everybody's science for them. And again, and also support final contract negotiations when it's relevant. So we're really talking about a very, very substantial pocket of money. About $50 billion a year are awarded in non-dilutive funding. Most of that is through the NIH and its 27 institutes. Many of them are not relevant for our subject today, but a very, very substantial amount of funding through the NIH, also other HHS organizations. I've marked in the slide today in red the ones that are relevant for us, but there are various others as well. Barda, FDA, CDC, NSF in the HHS, in the Department of Defense, the Army, DARPA, DTRA, CDMRPs, and also we look to private foundations when relevant. The NIH budget did undergo a slight decrease last year. It used to be above 30, about 30.9, and now it's 29.1. That was expected, but it's still a very, very substantial pocket of money, especially since most of the money here is going to extramural research, meaning not research conducted in the NIH itself, but it's going outwards and supporting external research. That could be through research project grants, through R&D contracts, to research centers. Generally, out of the 29.1 billion, about 24 billion is actually going outwards, and that is important. That's a lot. In terms of where the money is going, so in this graph, these areas of research are not mutually exclusive, meaning if you add the sums up, it will not be exactly the NIH budget, nor is this all of the actual indications that they are investing in. So it's just to give you a general idea. I have it over 3 years, this year, last year, and the estimate for next year, so you can see any marked changes, and basically see that there aren't any. And for our matter, it's interesting to look at infectious diseases, which is one of the highest funding levels on the chart and in general, and it's about $5 billion annually that are going to infectious diseases. If you look at the awards in infectious diseases, you'll see that it's staying fairly constant and even going slightly up. And we don't expect any marked shifts in this. It's important to note that this really is a great area of research to be in funding-wise. First of all, a lot of money is being awarded, and another thing that's interesting and important is that the money is available, unlike many other areas of research, for pretty much all stages of research, anywhere from preliminary data, proof of concept, and all the way through advanced clinical trials. And that's really not something you can say about most areas of research. So it's something that's definitely worth looking into, no matter where you are in your research. NIAID, the National Institutes on Allergies and Infectious Diseases, is the institute within the NIH that does most of the funding for infectious diseases. And the NIAID mission is to conduct and support basic and applied research to better understand, treat, and ultimately prevent infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. Their budget also, again, fairly constant and even a slight increase, even though, as I mentioned, the NIH in itself did undergo a slight decrease. So this is a priority area for spending for them, and rightfully so. It's an important area of research. In terms of the actual mechanisms, the funding routes, well, the first one is probably the one that most people are most well aware of. Solicited applications, which would basically be you putting your keyword, the name of your bug or whatever, into the NIH search engine or grants.gov, and finding relevant opportunities, reading through them, finding one that really fits what you're doing, and sending that out. So they would be soliciting research, and your research just happens to be a good fit for what they're looking for. And that's great, and I'll be sharing many opportunities of this type today. But I would also it's important basically to understand that roughly 70% of the NIH funding that's going towards research is actually allocated through unsolicited mechanisms. And that would mean that even if you do that search, you take your keyword and you plug it into the NIH search engine and it comes out blank, and you don't really have a specific solicitation that's a good fit for you, you can still approach the relevant agency in the NIH. If you're researching cancer, then the NCI. For our needs, it's NIAID. And again, if you do it the wrong way, then obviously they won't consider your request. But as long as you're approaching the right institution, then you are the one who actually basically presents your ideas and your science the way you want to, and that's why it's called investigator-initiated. And there are various mechanisms, RS-21s, RO1s, SBIRs. All of these ways are excellent ways to obtain funding, and we utilize them on a regular basis. Another thing here is broad agency announcements, fairly substantial. I'll be sharing quite a few of them today as well. And it says here, brace yourself, and what I mean is basically that they're very hefty documents to put together. It's a lot of work. It's definitely worth it, especially when you win, because the awards are quite substantial as well. And I'll get into more details when I'm sharing the actual solicitations. Something I do want to touch on is the difference between grants and contracts. A grant is essentially money that is given to you from the government. There's a lot of trust there, and it's not something that's easily taken away from you. Once they give you the money, they give you the money. There are not many strings attached. A contract is different in many ways. It's really a contract you sign with the government agreeing to carry out specific scientific activities. You have to do that on time, you have to do it on budget. It's really a contract. There are definitely more restrictions and more strings attached, but the financing could be very substantial, so it's definitely not something you want to overlook. So I'm going to be sharing a few opportunities now. I'm going to start with the NIH opportunities, starting from the preclinical ones and then moving towards the slightly more rare but definitely existing in this field, clinical opportunities. And then I'm going to be moving on to other HHS organizations, and finally to the Department of Defense and sharing some from there. The first one I want to share is well, the reason I'm putting this one first is because of the submission deadline. It's August 13th, so it's rapidly approaching, and if you do find this relevant and appealing, I highly suggest you start yesterday, because it's also a lot of work. It's definitely a great opportunity, though. So basically, it's the targeted therapeutics development to relieve bottlenecks, optimizing lead therapeutic compounds against infectious pathogens. It's a NIAID BAA, a broad agency announcement. There is no budget cap, which is always a positive thing. We've found that for solicitations like this, a good amount to ask for, again, depending on the scope of your work, but it would be about 2.5 million. So over 3 years, that's about 800,000 a year. The point here would be advancement of promising lead therapeutics to clinical drug candidate stage. And we're talking about therapeutics for category A, B, and C priority pathogens. I've added the link here at the bottom of the slide to the actual categories and the list of pathogens. So if you're not sure if your target is on the list and where it is on the list, I advise checking that out. There's specific interest here in broad spectrum antivirals and antibacterials. So really, if you do have a broad spectrum antiviral or antibacterial and at the right stage of research for this program, I really do highly recommend making the effort. Yes, it's tight. August 13th is not very far away, but it's a great opportunity, and you should definitely try to go for it if you can. Another very attractive opportunity is NIAID's R21, R33, development of novel therapeutics for select pathogens. This is not a standard opportunity. It's not recurring. Most opportunities, as you probably are aware, SBIRs, R21s, R01s, they are recurring. There are several set deadlines every year in 4-month cycles, and they're also reissued every year. And this is not the case with this solicitation. It's not necessarily a one-time thing that will never return. This is not the first time that there's ever been something like this, but it's definitely not something you can count on. It won't be multiple times a year at all, and not necessarily even every year. So it's definitely worth going after if it's relevant for you. It's joint R21 and R33. You'd be applying for both initially. The first 2 years would be under the R21 phase. And in that phase, you would be getting $275,000 over that 2-year period. And over the following 3 years, you would be getting $300,000 a year. So that's altogether almost $1.2 million. And I think that's the importance here is that this is a very high amount of money for a mechanism that is looking to fund basic and translational research. Really no preliminary data or very limited preliminary data necessary. And you won't often find these large amounts of money going to research at that stage. So it's definitely worth looking into. The focus here is antibiotic-resistant gram-negative bacteria or influenza. So if that's your area and you do have a promising project in early stages, I really do highly recommend going for this. And the deadline is October 20th, also not very far away. You should get working. Obviously not as pressed as the August 13th deadline we just discussed, but not the far future either. Okay, I'm going to share two counteract opportunities now. The counteract is Countermeasures Against Chemical Threats. This is the Exploratory Developmental Project. So it's an R21 issued by multiple agencies. It's a joint issuing. The funding here is $500,000 for the combined 2-year period, and they're looking for exploratory and developmental therapeutics, exploratory and developmental stage research for therapeutics, and the target would be chemical threat agents, sarin gas, VX, industrial chemicals, agricultural chemicals. If this is your area, it's again a very nice opportunity, and the submission here is January 30th. The more advanced counterpart of basically this very similar scope would be the Cooperative Research Project, also Counteract Cooperative Research Project. Cooperative Research Project, a UO1, is much more, you'll be in much tighter connections with the agency. It's much more of a hands-on mechanism. You'll be talking with them about your milestones, your progression. You'll be visiting with them periodically. And so it's fairly hands-on. The funding is $2.5 million over 5 years, and the point again is therapeutics for chemical threats. Here, there's also emphasis on bringing it towards an IND submission to the FDA. And again, if relevant, go for it by all means. This is an SBIR from NIAID. Radiological and Nuclear Medical Countermeasure Product Development Program. So the funding here is very high for an SBIR. It's $300,000 for over 2 years for phase 1, and $1 million over 3 years per year over 3 years. The first one was per year again, and sorry I didn't mention that. So it's $300,000 each year over the 2 years, and $1 million over 3 years, $1 million each year. So that's $3 million in total for the phase 2 and $600,000 for the phase 1. Very substantial funding for an SBIR. This is basically for product development and countermeasures for radiological and nuclear threats. And again, point would be leading to IND or IDE submission packages to the FDA. So we're talking about non-clinical and preclinical research in this area. And the upcoming submission is August 5th. So you really have to be in motion or really move quickly. If you're not in place to meet the August 5th deadline, the next one would be December 5th. Clinical research is a bit harder to fund usually through the NIH. In infectious diseases, it is actually possible. It's not true for many areas, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to share with you a few ways to do that. So I'm going to start with, actually, this is a clinical trial planning grant. It's an R34, and they're actually willing to fund you for a year, give you $150,000 to help you plan your clinical trials. There's no actual research in this grant. It's really the planning of your clinical trials, and they're willing to fund that phase for you of the planning. Your rationale, your design, your protocol, any other elements that you need to plan. And it's a very interesting offer and worth utilizing if that's where you are. That being said, if the clinical trial you're wanting to conduct is already ready for implementation, this is not where you should be sending it. There is an RO1 and a UO1, and I'll be talking about the UO1 and briefly touching about the RO1 as well. So let's move to that. I'll just mention that the deadlines would be September 11th of this year and January 13th of 2015. This is the UO1 counterpart, again, for clinical trials. We highly recommend contacting the program officer in advance to make sure that this is the right solicitation and that it will be well received. Where you are research-wise is important because they're looking for specific stages in research here. The funding is $500,000 a year for up to 5 years, so $2.5 million. And again, this is a cooperative agreement, fairly hands-on, like I mentioned earlier. And this is for high-risk clinical trials. You can go online and look for the exact definitions for the difference between high and low risk. Most clinical trials are defined as high risk, but it's worth checking out. And if you are a low-risk clinical trial, then you would be submitting to the R01 mechanism and not the U01, and so that's definitely worth making sure of. And it's worth pointing out that you need to have an IND to submit here. Same deadlines as the previous one, September 11th of this year and January 13th of 2015. Okay, Barda is a very interesting agency. I couldn't say enough positive things about them, honestly. We love working with them. They're very, very responsive. I highly recommend getting what they call a tech watch before you actually start applying to them and working with them. They'll meet you. You'll come. You'll discuss your science with them. They'll give you pointers, ask you questions, and basically tell you if you're ready for Barda or you're not ready for Barda, and which is much more than most agencies will do. It's really wonderful working with them. What they're charged with doing is developing and procuring, and I stress the word procure, and I'll get back to that in a minute, medical countermeasures that address chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, or CBRN, accidents, incidents, and attacks, pandemic influenza, and emerging infectious diseases. And they really try to bridge the so-called valley of death between what is easily fundable, well, not easily, but fundable by the NIH, the discovery and preclinical. And well, the NIH, like I mentioned, sometimes do delve into phase 1 in certain areas. But anyway, they try to bridge that gap all the way to the actual, procurement and really having the final product. And the way they do that, they look for very promising preclinical data or interesting phase 1 results, and then they'll go ahead and help you advance that forward. I want to go back to what I said earlier about the procurement. They not only are funding research, but they also stockpile these countermeasures. So a great thing about receiving funding from them is you're not really just receiving funding for research, you're actually getting a very major client for your product once you're done developing it. They will stockpile your product. They will buy it from you when you're done in large quantities. So this is really something to consider, and it's a great option. Generally, how it works when you're submitting to the Department of Defense or Barda, you start with the white paper. White paper is typically a 2-page document, but it could be 5 in certain mechanisms, 8, 10, probably up to 10. I've never really seen one more than 10 pages. And it's a high-level overview of the project. Interestingly, this is the most critical stage. Most applications do not pass this stage of the white paper, and it's really the major cutoff is right there. So it may be a short document, but you should put a lot of thought and a lot of work into it, because this, in more cases than not, is what will decide who has good chances of being awarded. After you submit that, typically you'll have about 90 days until you receive your answers, and they'll review it. And if it's favorably reviewed, you'll be asked to submit a full application. Depending again on the mechanism and the agency, it could be anywhere between 45 days and all the way up to 90 days to prepare the full application, which is not a lot of time. These are usually large applications, hundreds of pages, even 90 days, which is the higher end of the spectrum here, is not a lot of time to prepare something like that. So you really do have to hit the ground running. When you submit that, it will be reviewed for technical merit, and hopefully will be well received. If so, after up to 6 months, 180 days, you'll get your response, and you'll enter the 3rd stage cost proposal negotiations and receive the award, hopefully. That is how it works in the DoD and Barda, with differences, as I mentioned, in the time frames in different agencies. Within the DoD as well, there are some differences. In Barda, all these BAAs, broad agency announcements, have no budget cap, but I would like to say something about when there have already been a few solicitations that have had no budget cap, and I would like to stress something about that. It doesn't mean you can ask for whatever you want. You really have to justify the budget and justify it with the scope of the work. It's not a blank check. Well, it is a blank check, but it's a blank check you have to justify. And so that's something that's very important, and I can't stress that enough. Actually, one of the webinars we'll be giving during the summer school will be on budgeting your applications. So if that interests you, by all means, go on our website and register for that and attend as well, and we'll be glad to have you. So the three solicitations here are, as I mentioned, all BAAs. So the first one is advancement of development of medical countermeasures for pandemic influenza. Second one is advanced research and development of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear medical countermeasures. And the third one is science and technology platforms applied to medical countermeasure development. If one of these areas is relevant, then by all means approach Barda. Like I said, TechWatch, etc. It really is a great agency to work with, so I highly recommend it. Department of Defense. Department of Defense utilizes a few different mechanisms, and actually a few different entities in the Department of Defense are those who allocate the funds. There's DARPA, who basically their mission is to maintain technological superiority of the United States, and they try to do that by really sponsoring high payoff, high risk, high reward, revolutionary research. You'll see it in their wording, because I will share one of their opportunities. It's kind of like Q from James Bond. They really look for groundbreaking stuff, and that's what they fund. They don't mind taking risks at all. So it's a very interesting agency to work with. DTRA, who are basically charged with safeguarding the United States from and its allies from WMDs. And the U.S. military, U.S. Army Medical Research and Materials Command, the USAMRIC, and they provide solutions to medical problems of importance to the American warfighter at home and abroad. So there definitely does have to be a military angle here. That being said, the angle can be just that, an angle. It doesn't have to be completely military-oriented research. It's important to note. So I'll start with DTRA. And this BAA from DTRA has no budget cap, and again, you have to justify the budget. And this is basic research on for combating weapons of mass destruction. And there'll be two similar ones. This is the basic research BAA, and basically, well, you should check their strategic thrust areas, and if one of them is a fit for what you're doing, then by all means apply. You should note that about 30% of the research needs to be carried out by an academic, and there needs to be a basic research orientation, so that's important to keep in mind. The fundamental research counterpart of this grant, or rather broad agency announcement, is the fundamental research to counter weapons of mass destruction. Again, no budget cap, and again, I will say it, you need to justify your budget. And basically, similar scope, more advanced research, looking for long-term challenges and really advancing our understanding and our ways to combat WMDs. And again, if this is relevant, read through the relevant thrust area, science of protection. You can just go online and it's enter this solicitation, and you'll find it fairly easily. And the third one from DTRA that I would like to share is R&D Innovation and Systems Engineering Office's Science and Technology New Initiatives. Again, no budget cap. And here it's chemical and biological defense solutions. So that could be pre-treatments, therapeutics, diagnostics, detection, protection, etc., etc. Really various options. Anything that is relevant to chemical and biological defense solutions is pretty much relevant here. And it's, again, a great opportunity. Funding, again, is not capped. Again, I want to say something about not capped. That needing to justify the budget doesn't mean it cannot be fairly high. We've had clients through Barda, not this specific solicitation, but through Barda that have won 14 million, 20 million, up to 60 million, and there have been companies that have won over 100 million from Barda, for example. And it's not the only institute that gives out those sums of money. So yes, you need to justify the budget, but if you have a very large project that needs that kind of a budget, and they're interested, they will fund you, and even when it's sums like that. So it's again, I just wanted to mention that because yes, you need to justify it, but there really is no cap if it is justifiable. So, U.S. Army. This is a BAA, and we're talking about basically providing solutions to medical problems of importance to the American warfighter. Various areas of research here. Go online and read and find if one of these is fit for you. I would like to mention that if we're talking about a category A, B, or C pathogen, then you should not submit it here, but submit it to DTRA in their BAA. Now DARPA. DARPA, like I said, is high risk, high reward. They're really looking for revolutionary, groundbreaking research. And so there's no budget cap here as well. And here I highlighted from their language, revolutionary advances, unconventional approaches. They like taking risks. This is what DARPA is there for. And so they will fund projects even with a 1% chance of actually meeting all the milestones. They want to have their socks blown off, basically. They want to read your ideas and say, wow. Not necessarily say, okay, this is doable. I mean, it has to be feasible. But if you have groundbreaking ideas that are not standard, unconventional, this could be a very interesting place to share them. And the goal here is to maintain the health and abilities of military service members. So again, there has to be a military angle to this research, but it's a very interesting opportunity and worth keeping in mind. So I think I shared quite a few very large options here, large opportunities with substantial funding, and with these larger amounts of funding come also much more complex applications, and there are some major challenges that entails. For example, when you're submitting a white paper, yes, it's a short document, but like I stressed earlier, it's very, very important, and it's sometimes harder to construct a really good two-pager than it is to write 30 pages. So first of all, are you responsive? No matter how good you are, and I touched on this earlier, if you're not exactly what they're looking for in this specific solicitation, then you should not submit to this solicitation. You should find something else that's more suited for you, or as I again mentioned earlier, you should go for something unsolicited, and that's fine. But if you do go for a solicitation, you have to be responsive. You have to adhere to the guidelines, and this is very important as well. Print out the guidelines, read them twice, read them 3 times, make sure you understand them. If you don't understand everything, or if there's something you're not even sure you understand, then by all means contact the agency. You could even contact me, that's fine, I'd be happy to help. And if I don't know the answer off the top of my head, I'll find out and I'll get back to you. It's very important. Great applications have not been awarded because of very, very trivial errors and things that could be easily avoided if everything was well understood initially. So pay attention to that. Is your scientific story compelling? Is it innovative? Do you have strong leadership? These are the real big questions, because in the end, and I'll touch on this in a minute, this is what will win you the application. And there are many unique sections, things that are not standard you won't find on SBIRs or even R21s and R1s. So it's a much more complex document and much more hefty. So these are things that you need to know how to deal with, or at least to have time to try to learn how to deal with. Also, project management and coordination could be an issue. With these large applications, there's really a lot of coordination and management to do. There could be many PIs sourcing data from, organizing it all into one neat, orderly package, something coherent and really cogent. And of course, short timeline. Like I mentioned, you have 2 or 3 months to come up with a very, very serious document, and that's not trivial, and you need to know how to do this. Touching on the actual review process, and this is taken from the NIH, but it really is applicable elsewhere as well. So the criteria they will judge you on, well, first of all, the reason they're judging you basically is what they're doing is a risk assessment, risk management. They're weighing the risks entailed in your project against the strengths that you offer, and being able to convey your strengths in a good way, and trying to mitigate the risks is really a big part of writing a winning application. And they'll be looking at leadership, management of your company, the PIs. Do they have the experience? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the expertise needed to lead such a project? The environment. Do you have the lab space? Do you have the right machinery? Do you have everything you need? Do you have everything in place? Is this really significant to health, to the public health, to the military when that is the focus? And also, is it innovative? Is it new? Are these ideas really something that will change something? And yes, all 4 of these categories that I touched on, you absolutely knew. The answer has to be yes. But given that the answer is yes, what will really win the application is first and foremost really a top-grade scientific approach. The aims, the goals, how to go about that. This is basically what will win. No, you can't do it without the others, but this is what will win you the application. I want to touch on responsiveness versus competitiveness. So absolutely, you have to be responsive, as I've said time and again. You have to be aligned with what they're looking to fund. But basically what they're weighing against the risks is how competitive you are in regard to the other applicants. We like to take a systematic approach towards non-dilutive funding, and we find this is the best way to maximize your chances of being awarded, and kind of making this a strategic source of income and not a one-time gamble or two-time gamble. So you need to really know the interests of the agency, understanding the landscape. If all of a sudden an agency has less interest in a specific bug, or the other way around, all of a sudden they're much more interested in something specific, then you need to know that, and you need to know where you should submit and when you should submit. And if this is not the right fit, then submit it elsewhere, or again, use an unsolicited mechanism. You really have to know the landscape and know what you're doing. You have to focus your project application. You have to make it very, very defined, a start and end to the project. None of these agencies or the government in general, they do not fund a lab or a company or a university. They fund projects. And if your project is a good project that they believe in and they believe it's well constructed, they will fund it. So that means if there are any gaps in your capabilities, then by all means go and find a collaborator that is strong in that area. You need to present a complete project. And also you need to ask for what is necessary. I kind of alluded to this earlier. Well, actually, I more than alluded to it, but I said that you need to ask for the right amount of money, and I stressed not asking for too much, but it's also important not to ask for too little, because they'll basically think that you don't really have a real understanding of your project, and that is a problem. So also important. Targeting the right mechanism. There are lots of different pockets of money out there. Each one has a different size of the award that will be distributed over a different amount of time, different success rates. Sometimes you won't even find the right target, and that's fine. Like I said, unsolicited is accounted for 70% of what the NIH gives out, so it's a substantial source of funding as well. And we really believe in conducting a thorough strategic assessment and really understanding what you want to do, what milestones you have on the way, what's in your pipeline, what you're looking to fund, and then linking all those tasks and subtasks to actual pockets of money that are out there. I'll get into that in a minute, but it's a very important part of the process. And you know what? I'll get into it now. So the first part of what we do is exactly that. Strategic consulting or strategic assessment is basically where our analysts would do exactly what I mentioned right now. Really get to know a company's R&D plans, all the milestones, and everything you really want to do, and really start linking those with pockets of money. The outcome of that is basically a list of relevant opportunities, and then through the understanding of the actual landscape and also reaching out to program officers, getting their feedback, etc., really come up with a more exact list of opportunities that really are fit for submission for the specific company. And then with the company, we translate that into a multi-submission granting strategy, which is basically kind of a Gantt chart of what solicitations we'd be going for at each time. And that's something we really believe that is, well, it's more than believe. We know that is the best way to go about it. Over our 15 years of experience, we found this is really the only way to make it a real strategic source of income. So that is the first part of what we do. And the second part is the actual production of the grants, wherein basically you would be working with one of our grant consultants or project managers. And initially, they plug in all the data they can get from you from any slide decks you have, previous submissions, executive summaries, etc. They plug that into a comprehensive template that would be aligned with the specific guidelines of the solicitation we were pursuing at that instance. And the outcome of that is basically a first draft. And from there on in, it would be ping-ponged back and forth in kind of an iterative review process, wherein we would ask questions, insert sections, rewrite sections, insert comments, really go through everything with you, and would keep going back and forth until we really feel that we've maximized the potential for awards. And then back to strategically assessing, and vice versa. The strategic assessment is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process as well. So that's why it's kind of circling back here. And this is basically the overview of the process, where it starts basically with your R&D funding needs, which are translated, as I described, into a multi-submission and granting strategy, and executing that in the short term with a short-term granting strategy, and then per grant the actual production and submission. That goes to the granting agency for review, and hopefully funding is awarded, and we start again. And that's basically how we go about doing it. I would like to thank you very much for attending today, and please feel free to contact me with any questions. This will be on our YouTube channel shortly, so feel free to check it out, recommend it to your friends and loved ones. And our upcoming webinar will be on the 23rd on R21s and R01s. I highly recommend listening for that as well. Thank you very much for being here with me today. And that is all. Thank you.